I'm a minister in Duffus, Spynie and Hopeman, which is just outside Elgin, a wee slice of Moray from which kind of goes from forestry through farming to the coastline. I've been here 8.5 years, and I think they were registered as an eco congregation before, but didn't seem to know that when I arrived. But and I suppose have been and this is one of these areas that one of the questions I was asked, was, well, why is this important? And there's a bit of me wants to go, do we still have to ask that? It seems a bit of a no-brainer that, of course, climate justice is important, but I suppose I would summarize it as, well, God's creation matters, and we are part of it and are called to love it, that we're called to love our neighbor, and that we pray for God's kingdom to come. And if God's kingdom it's a kingdom of love and justice and peace, then we have to deal with all of this, and the huge injustice of climate change affecting folk who have done least to cause it, and the huge injustice to future generations as well, it has to be addressed. And it's clearly something, and in some ways one of the things I would have seen change in the last few years is that even in Moray, which has had its own little wonderful microclimate, the changes in weather have become much more noticeable. And so in some ways, what even maybe 8 years ago was something for people over there or for future generations, that the climate justice, climate change conversation, people are at least, is actually getting, it's easier to have the conversation because people see the effects in the fields around them and the towns, and so there's been quite a lot of change, and it's now both local and global, and it's now as well as in the future, and it always was, but it's more visibly so. For our congregation, I think all of this kind of climate justice conversation overlaps with lots of other things that have been part of this congregation's life, in some case for decades. We're a fair trade church, and the Fair Trade Foundation are also asking us to take action around COP and climate justice. We have our mission partner is Fiona Kendall, who works with Mediterranean Hope. We're involved, we have made a commitment, the With Refugees Scotland commitment. And again, the whole issue of refugees ties in, climate is increasingly going to be one of the reasons why people have to find new homes. But I would join with Ian in an enormous plug for Eco Congregation. I would do that with declaring an interest that I'm a trustee. And it's been really encouraging. I mean, we are not a gold award as Westray, but we've managed as far as silver, doing, and would echo all that Ian says about how that joins up so many aspects of congregational life. But actually, one of the things that's been brilliant through a really difficult lockdown period is that Eco Congregation Scotland, if you're looking for interesting thoughts, ideas, all sorts of ways of approaching this across the breadth of life that climate justice touches on, and climate change is affected by, Eco Congregation Scotland have had a huge range of online events, a regular rolling programme of those, and that's been great to occasionally point people to occasionally get to, and also to connect. We managed our first, Moray has a wee network, a local network of eco congregations, and we managed our first in-person something a few weeks ago, where we went for a prayer walk around Fauchebers, in fact, and looking at river and water and power and energy and things, but just very gently. And again, just to connect with others and know that you're not doing any of this on your own, and that when it's really frustrating or it feels like, is it just me? Then eco congregation networks are also a good thing. And also, if you're doing online stuff on the eco chaplain, David Coleman, has all sorts of interesting, challenging, creative resources available that are worth looking up. And just having that structure. But then one of the huge challenges I find, we have an eco group in the congregation. It's great that it's not just me. But it last met probably about 2.5 years ago, that I have, it's on a to-do list, that I have actions from that last meeting. But I've had one or two other things going on. And so one of the huge challenges I find with whether it's eco-congregation specifically or any of this stuff is it is so important, but it is one of so many things pulling at my attention and the attention and energy of anyone in any congregation or community. And if anyone has answers to a minister's diary or how we balance that, I don't know, but it's one of the big challenges is how this gets the prioritization it needs in congregational and church life that has so many other priorities. The other huge plug I would give is to Christian Aid, and I think a huge part of what feeds everything we do, and I'm assuming Val will do the official plug later, but and anything I say about Christian Aid and their resources probably could also be said about Tear Fund and their resources. But for us, this congregation, Christian Aid is part of its identity and heritage and work. Again, both in terms of I think crucially stories to share, stories from the global south, stories of those who are most affected, and what can be done and what needs to be pushed at. So Christian and seasonal ones and Christian Aid Week, so focused on climate justice. But also beyond the stories, Christian Aid I find are probably the best way I push. Christian Aid and Church of Scotland are a great source of actions, because it feels like they're quite often, they will be radical actions asking the world to make radical changes and asking our politicians to make radical changes. But when it comes from Christian Aid or the Church of Scotland, rather than the head of Jenny or any of, or other bodies, it feels like an easier into the congregation's life. And to say, Christian Aid are asking you to write to your MP, as I did last week, and I handed out the briefing that we're asking for, I'm hoping that our local MP, who also happens to be leader of the Scottish Conservative Party, may get a few letters at least. But Christian Aid and Church of Scotland requests are a very good way, or I feel the safest way to invite a congregation to take radical action, because it's the church asking, and it's our partners and sisters and brothers asking. And the power of stories, and actually the power of resource and the great resources there are for schools, because like Ian, again, it would be one of these things that would be part of most things we talk about, or certainly most things I talk about, and it should always feed into things we're talking about in school and community. Sorry, I've talked lots about all these, what we're actually doing with all these things. Like Ian, I would say it shapes every week life of and worship, though that prayers of confession and thanks and commitment and seeking guidance, and that's both online and in person at the moment. We have used the creation time. I've found that quite helpful as a creation time resources, and that season has been good. We did a Climate Sunday service. We will, I think, make a fairly definite focus on COP, at least on Sunday worship, and praying for it at the time, though maybe not extra stuff beyond that or extra activities. We try and share information and tips and awareness raising in our church magazine, stuff from the General Assembly. I would try and share stuff on Facebook. And again, sometimes the trick is there's just so much out there, and trying to find what might be most relevant or contextually relevant. And I suppose anything we share in the congregation, the congregation and community are fairly well linked, and therefore that should. And again, it's maybe just, and part of that would just be seeing that as a more normalized conversation over the last umpteen years. That when things come up and you talk about climate change, I don't ever feel I have to justify talking about that anymore. Some of the biggest challenges are in talking about it. because of some of the wider conversations, particularly around suggesting people eat less meat, when I live surrounded by fields, many of which have cattle in them, and my deputy session clerk is a beef farmer. Many of those who used to work in fishing transferred into the oil industry, and so farming, fishing, fossil fuels, and an RAF base that flies quite a lot. All of these mean that some of the conversations, I'm aware, pastorally get complicated, and actually are complicated, because actually it's probably more helpful to talk about what we eat and buying local. That if you're eating meat that was a cow that was in the field next door a wee while ago, that probably isn't actually, it's a different conversation. But it means that some of the communication is careful, has to be careful. I probably haven't said as much locally about fossil fuels as I have on the floor of the General Assembly, which may be profoundly hypocritical of me. Buildings are a huge challenge. We probably could do something locally. We would have the resource of sunshine in Moray quite often, but we have two large buildings, one of which is never warm. Any conversation about buildings and heating overlaps now with presbytery planning stuff and uncertainty about what the future of buildings is. And until that's more certain, how do you commit to what might be large investments of capital that we don't really have anyway, to do something about solar panels, for example? We've had, but again, I have been aware that at least the conversations about heating, which have been going on for many years, there is, it is an accepted statement that no, we are not going to be getting a new oil boiler anywhere, because that's not sensible, or with a climate emergency. And COVID has possibly helped us in that, because we're now using fewer buildings each week, because we're trying to ease the burden on cleaning and things. So, but then using fewer buildings every week brings in more travel questions. And again, COVID's confused lift sharing, but then it's also introduced online stuff. So there's a kind of really, anything around buildings is quite complicated and frustrating in my case, and is entangled now with wider church stuff, wider Church of Scotland planning things. And I should stop talking any minute. I suppose one of the other, specifically on I suppose some of the other challenges would be around all of that stuff, around time and actually living it out. I mean, again, the concern of personal hypocrisy, anything around travel, I find hits questions about time, which hit questions of busyness, which hit questions of too much going on in the life of the church, and too many hats being worn. And actually a lot of the communication of messages around that, again, we need to talk about this, but we also need to talk about stewardship in other ways, and we need to talk about, and we've got Life and Work Sunday, and we've got Crossreach Sunday, and we've got this other thing, and planning conversations, and so again, finding the place of this, of climate justice, which is so massive and important in amongst everything else, and finding time and headspace is, yeah, challenging. And I'm sure there's lots more, but I should stop, because otherwise you're, yeah. But that's some of the lots of wee things, but they're never feeling quite enough that's going on in Duffus, Spynie and Hopeman, and my head.